There is a thought in your head right now that you have already thought 1,000 times. You know what it is. You do not even have to search for it. It is just there, the way it always is, sitting at the edge of everything else you are trying to do. You have tried to let it go. You have told yourself it does not matter anymore. You have reminded yourself that thinking about it changes nothing. And for a moment, that works. Then it comes back, quietly, steadily, the way it always does. And you find yourself in the same loop you swore you were done with. This is not weakness. This is not you failing at something everyone else has somehow figured out. Something real is happening in your mind, and it is worth understanding. You are not someone who just cannot move on. You are someone whose mind is holding on for a reason it is not fully told you yet. And you are not alone in this. Buddhism has understood this pattern for a very long time, and what it says about why certain thoughts stay might change how you see your own mind. That is what we're going to explore today. And you have felt this, that particular moment when you know clearly and logically that a thought is not helping you. You know it is not useful. You know going over it again will not give you a different answer, but knowing does not make it stop. The thought keeps arriving, quiet and familiar, like it belongs there, like it has always belonged there. The Buddha once said, "The mind is everything. What you think, you become." And here is what that means for you. When a thought visits your mind once, it is just a thought. When it visits 100 times, it starts to feel like truth. Not because it is true, but because repetition creates familiarity, and familiarity feels like certainty. That is not philosophy. That is the actual mechanism of how the mind works. Every thought that loops reinforces itself, not by being correct, but simply by returning. And that is where it gets harder. Because the thoughts that will not leave, they are never really about nothing. They are attached to something you care about deeply. A relationship that ended before you felt ready. A conversation you had or did not have that still does not feel finished. A decision you made that part of you has never fully accepted. A version of yourself you are still quietly grieving, without quite knowing you are grieving it. Think about it this way. When a thought keeps returning, your mind is not broken. Your mind is pointing. It is trying to draw your attention to something that has not yet been fully seen or resolved. The loop is not the problem. The loop is the signal. In Buddhism, this is understood through the concept of upadana, which means clinging or grasping. Not the grasping of greed exactly, but the grasping of the mind that cannot release what still feels unresolved. You are not clinging because you are weak. You are clinging because something in you still needs tending. The thought is not a mistake. The thought is a messenger that keeps knocking because it has not yet been let in. And here is the thing about upadana. It is not always obvious what you are actually clinging to. You might think the looping thought is about a person, but underneath that, the mind might be clinging to who you were when you were with them. The version of yourself that existed in that relationship. The one that felt certain about things. The one that had not yet made those particular mistakes. You might think the thought is about a decision you made, but underneath that, the mind might be clinging to the belief that you should have known better, that you should have seen it coming, that a wiser or more careful version of you would have handled it differently. And you might think the thought is about something you lost. But underneath that, the mind might be clinging to the possibility that it could have turned out another way, that the loss was not final, that somewhere in the replaying of it, a different outcome might appear. This is why logic does not work on these thoughts. You cannot reason your way out of something that is not primarily about reason, because the thought is not living in the part of your mind that responds to argument. It is living somewhere deeper and quieter than that. And you know this feeling. You have been here before. You have made the case to yourself clearly and carefully. You have listed all the reasons the thought is not useful. You have tried to reframe it. You have tried to replace it with something better, something more forward-looking, something more kind. And for a moment, it seems to work. You feel lighter, then it comes back. Buddhism does not see this as a failure of willpower. It sees it as a signal that the approach itself may need to change, because the thought is returning, not because you are weak, but because something beneath it has not yet been seen clearly enough. Here is what that means in practice. When a thought loops in your mind, the usual response is resistance. You push against it. You tell yourself to stop thinking about it. You distract yourself with noise or activity or other people. You fill every quiet moment, so the thought does not have a chance to surface. But resistance does not dissolve a thought. It preserves it. It keeps the thought charged and waiting, ready to return the moment the noise falls away. Think about how it feels when you go to bed at night, when the room is quiet and there is nothing left to do. The thought that you spent all day avoiding is waiting there exactly where you left it. That is not coincidence. That is what resistance creates. The Buddhist path moves in the opposite direction. Instead of pushing the thought away, it asks you to look at it, not to give it more weight, not to circle it endlessly, but to actually look at it steadily and honestly, the way you might look at something unfamiliar that you have been afraid to examine closely. Because most looping thoughts, when you finally sit still and look directly at them, they are not as solid as they seemed. They are made of layers. The surface layer is the thought itself, the story, the image, the memory, the regret. The next layer down is the feeling underneath the thought, the sadness or the guilt or the longing that the thought is carrying. Below that is the belief that created the feeling, often something quiet and long-held and unexamined, a belief about what you deserved, about what you were supposed to do, about what love or success or safety was supposed to look like. And at the bottom of almost every looping thought, when you go all the way down, there is a fear. Fear of having made the wrong choice. Fear of having been the wrong person. Fear that something was lost that cannot ever fully come back. Fear that the version of you who did that thing or missed that thing or lost that thing is somehow permanent. Something is shifting in how you understand this. Because once you can see the fear underneath the thought, you stop being at war with the thought. You start to recognize what it is actually trying to do. Looping thoughts are, in a strange way, the mind's attempt to protect you. They are the mind rehearsing, going back over something that felt unresolved again and again, so that maybe this time it can find a different ending, or at least find the understanding. that would make the ending feel acceptable. The mind is not looping because it is stubborn. The mind is looping because it is still searching. But the mind cannot find a different ending by replaying the same footage. The Buddha described the untrained mind as a monkey jumping from branch to branch, never still, never settled, always reaching for the next thing. That image holds something important. The monkey is not jumping because it is foolish. The monkey is jumping because it has never been shown that it is safe to stop, that rest is allowed. That stillness is not the same as defeat. Your mind loops because it is still looking for something. It will keep looking until it finds it, or until you offer it something more honest than resolution. Here is what that means. Resolution, the kind your mind is searching for, often does not come in the form the mind expects. The mind wants a clear answer. It wants to know that the decision was right, or that it has been forgiven, or that the loss was somehow necessary, or that things happened the way they were supposed to happen. But life does not always offer that. Some things end without explanation. Some conversations never get finished. Some relationships close before everything has been said. And the mind, not knowing what to do with that, keeps returning to it, keeps asking the same question in different forms, hoping that this time, finally, something will finally answer. In Buddhist psychology, there is a concept called samskara. These are the impressions left on the mind by experiences that carried strong emotion. Not just memories, impressions, marks, the kind that change the texture of your inner world, even after the event itself is over. Think about the difference between remembering a random Tuesday afternoon and remembering the moment something changed everything. Both are memories, but only one leaves a samskara. Only one continues to shape how you see, how you feel, and what your mind returns to when it is given space to wander. This is why certain thoughts are so persistent. They are not just memories. They are marks left by moments that mattered. And marks do not vanish simply because you decide they should. But in Buddhist practice, samskaras are not seen as permanent damage. They're seen as grooves, patterns worn into the mind by repetition and emotion. And just as grooves can deepen with use, they can also, over time, become shallower. Not through force, through understanding, through the slow, patient work of seeing what is actually there and meeting it with something gentler than the judgment or resistance you have been giving it. Here is something worth sitting with. When a thought keeps returning, most people ask, how do I make this stop? But the more honest question is, what has this thought been trying to show you that you have not been ready to look at? Because the mind is not arbitrary. The thoughts that loop are the ones connected to something real, something you cared about, something that mattered, something that still matters now. Dismissing the thought does not address that. Drowning it out does not address that. Only actually looking at it clearly and with honesty begins to address that. And when you do, something quietly shifts. But here is what nobody tells you about this. The question the thought is asking, it is not the real question. The real question underneath every looping thought, underneath the regret and the replaying and the not letting go, is this: am I going to be okay? And that question, the mind cannot answer through thinking. It can only be answered through something deeper, through actually stopping, through actually feeling, through being honest with yourself about what is still sitting there unacknowledged. Consider what happens when you finally allow yourself to feel what the looping thought is carrying instead of only thinking about it. Most people are very skilled at thinking about their feelings. They analyze them, they explain them, they construct careful stories about why they feel what they feel. But there is a real difference between thinking about a feeling and actually feeling it. When you think about grief, you stay in your head. When you actually feel grief, it moves through you. And things that move through you do not stay forever. Only the things you refuse to feel are the ones that remain indefinitely, buried beneath the busyness of the day, waiting for the quiet to come back up. The thought that keeps returning, the one you have been trying to manage and outrun and reason away, it is not staying because you are doing something wrong. It is staying because the feeling underneath it has not yet been allowed to run its course. Grief needs to be grieved. Regret needs to be acknowledged. Fear needs to be met with something steadier than itself. Not because meeting these things is comfortable, but because the alternative, which is spending years in a loop, is its own kind of suffering. And you have already spent enough time in the loop. In Buddhism, the practice that addresses this is called vipassana, often translated as insight meditation. Not relaxation, not emptying the mind, not trying to reach a state of blankness. Insight, the practice of actually looking at what is happening inside you with a steady, honest, and kind attention. Not to fix it, not to judge it, not to push it away or pull it closer, just to see it. What you look at with honesty starts to change, not because looking fixes it, but because most of the suffering of a looping thought comes from resistance, from the fight between the part of you that does not want to feel this and the part of you that keeps feeling it anyway. When you stop fighting it long enough to look at it, the fight itself begins to settle. And what Vipassana reveals, slowly, is something that changes the relationship with every thought you will ever have. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that notices the thoughts. That distinction sounds simple. It is not. Because when you believe you are your thoughts, a looping thought feels like an identity. The thought about regret makes you a person defined by regret. The thought about failure makes you a failure. The thought about loss makes you someone who only knows how to lose. The thought becomes you, and you become the loop. But when you begin to see yourself as the awareness behind the thoughts, as the one who notices, rather than the one who is defined by what is noticed, something begins to shift. The thought can arrive, and you can notice it arriving. You can recognize it, see what it is carrying, understand what it is asking, without being swallowed by it, without becoming it. This is not suppression. This is not telling yourself the thought does not matter. It is the difference between standing in the rain and watching the rain from a place of shelter. The rain is still falling. You are still aware of it, but you are not being soaked by it. And that is the beginning of something real. Not the end of difficult thoughts, but the beginning of being free from the loop, not by escaping it, but by no longer being trapped inside it. And here is what that shift makes possible. It means that the next time the thought arrives, you do not have to brace yourself against it. You can simply notice it. Oh, This one again. You know what it is carrying. You know what it is asking. And there is something in that recognition, something quiet and almost surprising. That is the beginning of compassion. Not compassion in the sense of giving up or pretending the thought does not hurt. Compassion in the Buddhist sense, which is the capacity to be present with what is difficult without needing to run from it. The Pali word for this is karuna. It means the wish for suffering to ease, and it applies not only to others, but to yourself, to the part of you that has been carrying this thought, to the part of you that has been running from it, to the part of you that is tired of the loop and does not yet know how to step out of it. Karuna toward yourself looks like this. Instead of judgment when the thought returns, you offer something quieter, something like, of course this is still here. Of course this still matters. Of course this is taking time. That is not giving in to the thought. That is recognizing that healing moves at its own pace, and forcing it only slows it down. Instead of spending your energy on resistance, you can spend it on understanding. Instead of asking, how do I stop this thought? You can ask, what is this thought still carrying? What has not yet been acknowledged here? What would it feel like to sit with this for just one moment without trying to make it leave? When you ask that question honestly, something in the mind begins to cooperate with you instead of working against you. The mind was never the enemy. It was trying, in the only way it knew how, to get you to look at something important. And the moment you look, really look, the urgency of the thought begins to soften. Not because the thing it was pointing to is now resolved, but because the mind feels, for the first time, that it has been heard. That is all the thought was ever really asking for. To be heard, to be understood, to know that the part of you it was carrying would not simply be dismissed or buried or drowned out with noise. Over time, you will find that the thoughts that once felt like they had no end begin to lose their charge. They visit less often, and when they do visit, they do not stay as long. Not because you defeated them, not because you finally found the answer they were looking for, but because you stopped fighting them long enough to understand them. And when something is truly understood, it no longer needs to keep returning. It has already said what it came to say. And that is the thing about all of this. It does not happen all at once. You do not sit with a thought once and find it gone. But each time you meet the thought with curiosity instead of resistance, each time you ask what is underneath this instead of how do I stop this, something loosens. Slowly, quietly, the thought that once consumed your whole mind starts to take up less space, because thoughts that are truly understood no longer need to keep knocking. They have been heard, and what has been heard can finally begin to rest. The Buddha said, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. That peace is not the absence of difficult thoughts. It is the presence of something steady enough inside you to be with them without being defined by them. That steadiness is already in you. It is not something you need to earn. It is not something you need to create from nothing. It is what you already are. When you stop running from what your mind is holding and turn to face it with a little more patience than you have been giving yourself. Today, you do not have to resolve the thought that keeps returning. You do not have to win the argument you have been having with yourself. You do not have to find the answer the thought has been searching for. You just have to be willing to look at it honestly, to sit with it for a moment without pushing it away. The thought is not the enemy. It is a part of you that still needs to be seen. And the part of you that recognized itself in what was said today, that part already knows the difference between fighting the thought and finally understanding it. When you see it clearly, really clearly, it will begin to soften on its own. Not because you forced it, because you offered it something it has been waiting for. Your honest attention, your willingness to be still, your patience with yourself. That is how the mind heals. Not through force, through understanding. If this stayed with you today, and you are looking for more of this kind of content, consider subscribing. There is more here whenever you are ready for it.